Stephanie, I'm looking for a way to turn my video on. Can you turn me on?
Your video is on, Mindy.
Very good, thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining. During this hour with you, we'll explore evidence-based grant making, the Texas vision. Advance a slide to the agenda, please, Stephanie. Texas vision, the national vision, and the model's tiered evidence framework. We'll end with a Q&A session. Let me make some housekeeping notes before we get started. Cameras and mics are turned off. Please remain muted during the webinar unless asking a question. Please hold questions for the Q&A session. You may also ask them in the Q&A thread during the webinar. I'll note that this first webinar is focused on the evidence-based model. No questions here, please, about the to-be-released equity RFA. We will have a webinar for that on March 9th. And finally, this webinar is being recorded. The recording will be shared with you and posted to our website in the days following the webinar. And next slide, Stephanie, please. Here you see our panelists for today's meeting. As you read through that, let's get started. I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Tina Jackson, Assistant Commissioner for Workforce Education, who will make brief remarks and then introduce our Deputy Commissioner, Ray Martinez. Tina?
Good morning, Mindy. Good morning, colleagues. The purpose of the Carl D. Perkins Career and Technical Education Program is to increase student access to high-quality career and technical education programs. The Perkins program focuses in on aligning CTE programs across secondary, post-secondary education with workforce demands. The program also requires that colleges use Perkins funds to remove or reduce barriers with student success. The Texas Education evidence-based grant-making model is intended to link grant funds directly to Perkins equity priorities while maintaining the flexibility to support innovative projects. We are excited about this new initiative and partnering up with the Texas Workforce Commission, the Texas Workforce Investment Council, and now I would like to introduce you to my colleague, Ray Martinez, who serves as Deputy Deputy Commissioner. Ray, are you on?
I am on. Good morning, Tina. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning. And good morning to all of our participants. Tina, thank you for the very kind introduction. I'm so pleased to be here and so privileged to work with a great team of public servants and professionals here at the coordinating board. I also bring greetings on behalf of Commissioner Harrison Keller, who is unable to join us this morning, but is aware of this webinar and I know sends very positive greetings for a productive hour with all of you today. As many of you may have heard, at our agency board meeting just a few weeks ago, the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board approved the Building a Talent Strong Texas Strategic Plan. The Talent Strong Texas Strategic Plan is a refresh of the 60 by 30 TX Higher Education Plan, which was adopted, of course, back in 2015. The revised goals of a Talent Strong Texas are to build a talent strong workforce for the future through increasing attainment of post-secondary credentials, to ensure that degrees, certificates, and other credentials are credentials of value that improve students' earning potential and support a stronger economy, and to support research and development aimed at building knowledge to drive the economy. So this morning, you all will hear about Texas evidence-based grant making, a state initiative that seeks to establish awards to workforce development grant proposals backed by solid evidence as the new normal in Texas grant making. Texas evidence-based grant making will support the Talent Strong Texas Strategic Plan through the creation of innovative approaches to workforce education. The initiative also provides Texas with the opportunity to learn from grant project outcomes and to build a repository of evidence for the state. The Texas evidence-based grant making model has already been adopted by the Texas Workforce Innovation Council and the Texas Workforce Commission are very esteemed partners that we get the privilege to work with on a daily basis here at the Coordinating Board. The Coordinating Board, of course, we join them with this initial evidence-based grant-making RFA, the Perkins Equitable Access and Opportunity Program that Mindy mentioned a short while ago, which is supported by Perkins State Leadership Funds. So now I'll turn things over to my colleague, Lee Rector, the Executive Director of the Texas Workforce Investment Council, and a great partner for our agency. And I know she and Commissioner Keller have many, perhaps even daily conversations about the importance of workforce education across the state. Lee will explain to you the national context for Texas evidence-based grant making and why the approach is needed now more than ever. Lee, good morning.
Thank you, Ray. So nice to see you, and good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to be with you today to have the opportunity to talk with you briefly about the state and national context for the evidence-based practices that you will hear about today. They're being implemented in Texas. So when we think about why we want to use evidence to help make better funding decisions, it's because we're focused on the results of the program that we're considering funding. So in its simplest concept, evidence-based grant making is focused on program models that will achieve better outcomes for program participants. Next slide, Stephanie. So why are we doing this in Texas? Well, there's one key reason, and that is the tremendous amount of funding that goes towards workforce education, training, and services in this state. In fiscal years 2020 and 21, there was over $1.6 billion in state and federal workforce funding for training and services, and over $200 million in Perkins funding for career and technical education programs in both high schools and post-secondary programs. Additionally, a huge amount of money has come to the state in emergency funding because of the pandemic. And while that means there is a lot of money to be allocated, we know that demand always exceeds the available funding and resources. So Texas embarked on its evidence journey in response to the need to fund discretionary grants that have the greatest opportunity of achieving the stated outcomes. The evidence and data that are provided in an application, and you'll hear about that later, are what gives the funding entity greater confidence that the planned outcomes will be achieved. And specifically, the addition of data sets in contracting and reporting of grant outcomes helps the funder better understand the actual program outcomes that were achieved. Now, I want to emphasize, and this is really important, that the evidence-based framework that you're going to hear about today has not been constructed as a barrier to deter funding for grant programs. Rather, it's a path for all applicants to begin to use evidence and data to better demonstrate that they can, in fact, achieve their proposed outcomes. Next slide. So Texas started its evidence-based journey with an invitation from Results for America about 2.5 years ago to form a Texas fellowship team. And Results for America is an entity that works with federal agencies, city and county agencies, and state agencies. And the goal of their work really in working with these agencies is to improve decision-making regarding the funding of the programs and services to achieve better outcomes. Results for America, or we call it RFA, has over the past number of years convened fellowships to provide a forum and opportunity for teams of participants to learn about, develop, and execute evidence-based frameworks to inform decision-making for all of the reasons I've already mentioned. Next slide. So here on this slide, you can see the information about the RFA work that I referred to, which is focused on state and local fellowships for workforce education and training specifically. In phase 1 of this initiative, the Texas team consisted of myself, a policy advisor from the Office of the Governor, the director of the Workforce Division at the Texas Workforce Commission, the director of grants and contracts from that same agency, and leadership with the Rural Capital Workforce Board. And there were 23 fellows from across 7 states. And the forum was convened for the fellowship as a learning experience for all of us to walk through the learnings and then share in terms of peer networking. The 3 goals of our team in phase 1 included define an evidence-based framework, design and implement outcomes-based contracting and payment model, and then also identify and fund an external evaluator to begin to develop evidence from Texas programs. In phase 2 of our evidence-based work with RFA, which began last summer, the team remained much the same, and the coordinating board joined us with the addition of Linda Natal to our team. And our work in this phase remains focused on the same 3 goals. We're also examining what we learned from our pilot grants and processes in phase 1 and determining how we can improve and extend the evidence-based model to other discretionary programs. Next slide. So what have we accomplished as we walked down this path? We've implemented the evidence-based framework across 2 grant programs, and you can see those here on this slide. The Texas Talent Connection Grant Program, which is the Wagner-Pizer 7B, which is the governor's discretionary grant for employment funding from the Department of Labor, and the Building and Construction Trades Grant Program, which comes from Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act funds and other federal funds at the Workforce Commission. The framework is also being implemented by the Rural Capital Workforce Board, who was our local partner on this team. To date, approximately $7 million in discretionary grants across these 2 programs have been allocated using the evidence framework as a decision-making tool so that we as funders have confidence that the grantees will achieve the outcomes stated in their application. The Texas Workforce Commission has also implemented outcomes-based contracting, outcomes-based payments, and outcomes-based reporting for the Building and Construction Trades program. Those are not going to be touched on today. They were specific to that one grant program, but they do serve as models for future reference as we move forward with evidence-based grant making in Texas. And the Rural Capital Workforce Board, interestingly enough, is using these outcome-based models of payments, contracting, and reporting for a service procurement pilot. I believe it's for their childcare services. The Ray Marshall Center at the University of Texas, many of you may well be aware of the work that they do in the workforce development area. They've been contracted as the external evaluator for the Building and Construction Trade grants, and they're going to be looking at performance of both individual grants and then across all grants to determine if there's a model or models of training intervention that resulted in positive outcomes for the participant that were statistically significant. And interestingly enough, this afternoon, there is a webinar with the grantees from that grant program, and we're meeting with Ray Marshall to look at data collection for that evaluation, which in large part comes from the performance-based contracting that was done at the front end of that grant. And today we're adding a new discretionary grant program to the Texas evidence-based grant making list, and that's the Perkins Leadership Grant Funding. We're so happy to have the coordinating board join us in phase 2 of this RFA fellowship, and to have the agencies and in particular Commissioner Keller's support for the use of evidence and data for an upcoming competitive Perkins grant solicitation. So we've had really good outcomes so far, and we're hoping to have and see similar outcomes through the Perkins grant. Do know that there is a team behind this consisting of 3 agencies plus a local board, and that we will offer all the assistance that we can in terms of support information, additional webinars, and technical assistance to anyone who is applying for a grant. And then after the application, if awarded, that there will be certainly assistance and technical assistance and support on the backside. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Dr. Stephanie Perkins, who is the Program Director for Workforce Education at the Coordinating Board, for her remarks. And following that, you'll get a really good close look at the evidence framework. Dr. Perkins.
Thank you, Lee. Appreciate that. Good morning, everyone. So we want to take a minute just to kind of talk more about how this relates to the leadership grant and what its main focuses are and where we're at. So we have approved the Carl D. Perkins Equitable Access and Opportunity Program, RFA, and this program will focus on the priorities of Perkins 5 as it stands with special populations. It will incorporate the Texas evidence-based grant-making framework to improve the measurement of success of the grant program, and we're going to learn more about those evidence tiers shortly. It's going to incentivize program models with a demonstrated track record of effective outcomes as well, and encourage building the evidence base for those models with little to no evidence. All grants will be evaluated. So where are we at today? The evidence-based framework is completed. Our RFA and application and other forms are currently in the finalization stages. There is a new email address for this initiative, perkins.equity@highered.texas.gov. That email address is currently active, and that's where we ask for any and all questions to be sent via email to this email address. And then once the RFA comes out, you will also see how important this email address will be to those who are applying and who are awarded after the fact as well. And then also, as of today, actually, we have our new webpage up for resources and information. So if you visit if you're familiar with our webpage, Career and Technical Education, the Perkins page, where we typically put our RFAs, there is a clickable link there now that's just specifically for this equity initiative. So what to expect? There's going to be new language in the RFA, of course. And as mentioned earlier, this webinar is not about the RFA. We will hold another webinar on March 9th that will go more in depth about the RFA and the application process and things of that nature. There will be new vocabulary, new forms. Most of you who are on this may be familiar with the Perkins portal. This initiative, this RFA, this application process, and everything that comes after that will not live in the Perkins portal. So it will be a bit different. There will be a new way to submit the application, and there will be new reporting requirements as well. And we will go into more detail with those after the RFA is released, and we will make sure to get all questions answered so that we don't leave anybody in the dark. And with that being said, I will now turn this over to Ben Holquist, who is with the Texas Workforce Commission. He's going to speak to us about the evidence tiers and what that looks like for this RFA and application process.
Good morning. My name is Ben Holquist, and I manage the Strategic Workforce Initiatives Department of the Texas Workforce Commission and helped write the Texas Evidence Framework that we'll be talking about right now. I want to start by just reemphasizing something that has been mentioned a couple times and will be mentioned again repeatedly. But this is intended to meet programs where they are right now. We've created this framework so that every program, regardless of how much evidence it's been collecting in the past, has a place on here and can kind of see how to move to the next tier. It's meant to be a ladder to help bring all programs forward and to a higher level of evidence going forwards. So we want to just make sure that nobody feels intimidated by this, and everybody can recognize that we are looking for programs at all evidence because we know that this is new and that we don't want to discourage applications from anyone. As you can see, there's the 5 levels listed here. I'm going to talk about them each in a little bit more detail. And I also want to mention that in the application at some point, there is a guide that was created that is part of this evidence framework that will guide you through and say, have you done this, then you are part of this tier. Have you not done this, well, then you're part of this tier. It's a very straightforward guide that worked very well in the pilot program. So we hope that will be very helpful as well. So this will not be the only guide on what can be used for the evidence or what tier you will be at. Before we go on, I just wanted to address a couple of the philosophical points that we used when we were developing this framework. And the first, as I mentioned, was that we wanted to make sure all programs had a place and could kind of see what the next step is. We also wanted this to show the whole vision of the evidence framework. We don't necessarily expect to see a lot of programs operating at the high evidence program tier right now, because we recognize that has not been a standard that's been expected in the past. And while presumably maybe a few programs are operating there, it would not be an expectation that we would see lots of programs operating there necessarily. But we wanted to share that to sort of show the direction that we're going in, because this is intended to be a long-term pivot in how we think about grant making and how we can help programs improve their own quality, and how we can identify quality outcomes for our grants. We also wanted to just take a moment to talk about evidence in terms of causal evidence. These 5 tiers are focused on causal evidence, which is not something that we've necessarily talked about historically. And we were trying to distinguish there between sort of performance data, which is one of the tiers, and that we know many programs have been collecting for years. But we know that sometimes, particularly in Texas, the economy can run so successfully that for workforce education, anybody coming out of any program, regardless of the program, may be getting a job and having a great result. And we wanted to look specifically to see, can we pinpoint and say that, yes, this program is the specific cause of the outcome that came to the participant, rather than simply showing that everybody who went into the program came out with a job. So those are sort of the 2 things that we've been thinking about, and I'll talk in more detail about those in a moment, but we'll go on to the next slide now and start talking. The new program tier is pretty self-explanatory, and it's really focused on programs that have no historical presence at all. This is for programs where it's a new concept that you've developed. These programs are really important. We don't ever want to suggest that we're not looking for innovation anymore. We are always looking for innovation, and we want to make sure that applicants understand that the new program tier is here, and it will always be here, because there will always be a need for new ideas in education. For this one, it's assumed that it's a completely new idea. It's not merely that it's new to your program, but it's new, and that you can't find out there that anybody else has ever done anything like this before. We'll talk in a moment about using other people's evidence, but this tier is for programs where there's just nothing that's ever been done before, and really all that you have is a logic model and an intention to be of why you think it will work. So that's the baseline level, and really any program can achieve this level of performance. Next slide, please. The experience program tier is one that we expect to see a lot of programs achieve. This is for a program that has been going on, and that has not been collecting concrete, definable program performance data. So there isn't just that you can say, well, out of the 100 people that participated last year, 91 completed the course and 79 got a job, or whatever kind of outcomes are appropriate for your program. But that the program has been around for a while and has been gathering feedback on how the success of the program. That might be in the form of participant surveys, it might be in the form of testimonials, it might be in the form of feedback from employers who hired participants from the program. This one is really, there's not a concrete, you must provide this piece of evidence. It's just to say that we're looking for anecdotal support that this program is successful, the participants had a benefit from it. And then it must have been providing services for at least 1 year, which is, makes sense because you do need to be able to show that there has been a time for people to give you feedback on the success of the program. Next slide, please. So performance program tier is another one that we expect to see a lot of programs operating at. This is one where the program's been in existence for at least 2 years and has been collecting concrete evidence of performance so that they can say we enrolled X number of participants, of those, Y number completed the program, Z number gained a certificate or a certification, or whatever the intended educational outcome is. Pardon me. And then perhaps somehow so many people took a job as well that was in the field. We do ask for 2 years of data on that to just show that the program is consistent. And we understand that in unusual circumstances, particularly COVID, can really affect performance data for a given year. So we want to look at least 2 years of data on there. And so, the key things there is that there needs to be some kind of an assessment of participant to demonstrate program effectiveness, whether that's a certification exam or some kind of exit exam for the program to show evidence of change for the participant. So that's the performance program tier. And as I mentioned, the experience and the performance program tiers are ones where we expect to see a lot of programs operating currently. And with that, we'll go on to the moderate evidence tier in the next slide. And this is really the first one that really gets to the heart of that causal evidence that I was mentioning before. So here we're looking at not just that there was outcomes, but that there was a detailed statistical analysis that shows that the results from this program can be traced to the actual program itself and not just to potentially some external confounding circumstances. We've created 2 tiers that look at that statistical. One is the moderate and one is the high. The moderate evidence one requires at least one study that has been shown, that shows both a positive and a meaningful outcome, and that the study was rated by an entity that can that has the statistical knowledge and the research knowledge to be able to assess the validity of the statistics that was done. And I'll talk more about them at the very end. But we wanted to just be clear that there are some details here. Of particular importance here, I want to mention that we understand that your specific program may not have had a study done, but you may be using a curriculum, a process, a program model that was studied in another setting. And so one of the things we want to mention is that if you can find a study that addresses the program that you're using, but that wasn't done at your location, that would be acceptable for the moderate evidence tier. Particularly, we want to emphasize that it has to be a clearly related program with only limited modifications from whatever the study was on. Examples of modifications are potentially applying it to a different population, potentially applying it in a different industry, things like that, where you're still capturing the core of the program design that was evaluated, but you may be applying it in a slightly different method than has been done historically. And this is a high bar. To be able to find that study in one of the clearinghouses is not something that we can guarantee. And so we just want to be clear that reiterate that we don't expect programs to necessarily be ready to achieve this tier at this time. But we do hope that going forward, we'll start to see more programs being able to have these studies done and move into these tiers in the future. Next slide, please. The high evidence program tier is really the sort of the dream. This is what we would really like to see, but we also understand that this is not where really any program is right now. I never want to say never, but we would not be expecting to see any programs in this tier necessarily. This tier requires 2 studies, not just one, that both show a positive and a meaningful outcome of causal evidence for that program. And again, both those studies will need to have been evaluated by the CLEAR or another entity's clearinghouse on data, so that we can be confident that the statistics and the research methodology that was done meets the causal evidence standards. And that to be at the high evidence program tier, it needs to be implemented more or less as intended. Again, you are using somebody else's program. It may be that you're using, the program was tested in a different state and now you're bringing it to Texas, but we would be looking for, again, very limited modification. We would want to see it in a similar population, in a similar industry, similar things like that, where there's not the kind of changes that maybe would be allowable at the moderate level, but would not be allowable at the high level. So those are the 5 tiers. And again, there's a place for everyone on here, and we do not expect everyone to be at the high evidence tier. So please do not feel intimidated by the challenge, the level of evidence required to achieve this level. We want to put this out here as something that we can all be aspiring to achieve. Next slide, please. I do want to talk briefly about the clearinghouses. The 3 clearinghouses that we are currently using are the Clearinghouse for Labor Evaluation and Research, which is from DOL, the Pathways to Work Evidence Clearinghouse, which is through HHS, and then the Crime Solutions one. These ones were selected because they have similar rating systems with similar standards, so that we can be confident that all 3 would rate the same study in basically the same manner. With these clearinghouses, the links here are live and will take you to a search function that allows you to search by topic, that allows you to search by program titles and things like that, so that you may be able to find programs there. And it may be that you are aware that some programs that you are offering have been studied already. We did encounter, to our pleasant surprise, that in the pilot program, several of the applicants did in fact have existing studies that had gone into the clearinghouse. The standards for the clearinghouses themselves do not look at a positive or a negative outcome. They are very specifically looking at the quality of the evidence. So if you'll recall, the moderate and the high evidence tiers both required both a positive and a statistically rigorous, meaningful outcome. The clearinghouses will tell you whether it has a statistically meaningful outcome, but they will not necessarily tell you whether that was a positive, if the program itself had a positive outcome. That's something that'll have to be pulled from the study itself. And that will need to be reviewed as part of this. So just be aware that just because you find a study that is in here and is at the correct evidence level, you also need to double check and make sure that that study had a positive outcome, because obviously in a study you could go in there and do some great research and discover that the program isn't statistically showing causal effect. So those are the 3 clearinghouses that are currently being used. We are looking at different ways to expand this and to operate in the future, because we understand that getting a study into these clearinghouses is not a simple process. But for right now, to guarantee the rigor of these studies, we are using these clearinghouses as our evidence formation. With that, I will hand this to Mindy, who can take us home, and I'll be available for any questions in a moment. You're on, Mindy.
Thank you, Ben. I'm trying to make my video come back. It says I'm on. I will go ahead and speak without video. Thank you.
On, Mindy.
I'm sorry?
Your video is on, Mindy.
Okay, I don't see it on my view. Well, thank you, Ben. Thank you, Lee. Thank you all who have contributed to our presentation during this webinar. We will move now to our Q&A session. And I want to finish the webinar section of our gathering with the question, why now? Why are we doing this now? It's been stated during the webinar, and I'll emphasize it here. We are building evidence for the future. Workforce education has come into prominence and national priority, policy priority. It has come into prominence and state policy priority. A good motto for workforce education and for any worthy proceeding is do what works. How do we know what works? We look at the evidence. So this is an opportunity both to begin building evidence for the future about this slice of workforce education, which is access to education and opportunity to have success in workforce education. It is also an opportunity to address the Perkins priority of providing equitable access and opportunity to all students who enter a CTE program. And with that, I will open the floor to Q&A. If you want to unmute your mics and speak, you certainly may do so, and I will moderate our Q&A session. And I want all panelists, please, to feel free to join in responses.
Hi, Mindy. I just want to clarify, attendees cannot unmute. So please, I put in the chat, if everyone could please utilize the Q&A feature to ask your questions. And we do already have a question. Ben, this might be directed towards you more so if you want to join us. It's Jennifer asked, I just want to clarify that for moderate and high evidence levels, if you are using another study, the moderate level is more flexible in terms, slight changes to population/industry, whereas with high level and using another program, the study must be more closely replicated.
That's exactly correct. The moderate tier is more flexible. We are willing to see more differentiation from the studied program if you're using an external program. And the high tier, it really does need to be the implementation of that program specifically.
Thank you, Ben. Currently, there are no other questions in the Q&A. So if you're with us as an attendee, okay, here we have a question. Will the evidence tiers be used as an eligibility point of entry for proposals? For example, will RFAs come out requesting applicants only apply if they can show moderate evidence?
No, that is not the case at all. The evidence tiers will provide bonus points to your application. Applications will be scored on a point system. You may, with your application, earn up to 100 points. You may earn up to 10 bonus points with the level of evidence tier you choose for your application. The RFA will guide you through a tree that allows you to select your evidence tier. Ben, can you elaborate on that, or have I got it right and complete?
Yeah, I think I would emphasize that we do not expect to see these used in a exclusionary way. This is intended for us to help identify programs that may be further along in developing their evidence, but we do recognize that there is going to be programs at all tiers. And again, we do want to make sure that we continue to foster innovation. And we understand that you cannot create a program and have high evidence at the same time. There will always be that need for slightly different situations. So we have not intended to develop this as any kind of exclusionary process.
Yes, bonus points for the evidence. And I want to point out to you that Ben did emphasize the new program tier and the experience program tier, neither of which require external objective evidence. They will enable you to tell us why you think a new program may work. They will enable you to tell us why you believe an existing program can be built out based on the success you've had to date. So that is a wonderful question. I appreciate it. You need not fear that evidence tiers will knock you out of the competition.
It might also be important to mention as well that as reviewers of applications, this will be a new process on our end as well. Applications will be reviewed in two different kinds of ways. Programmatically, there will be a review team, and then the evidence-based portion of it will also have a review team. People can't be, there can't be one person that serves on both teams of evaluators. So it will look a little different on our side as well as to how these are evaluated.
Do you have other questions?
There are currently no questions in the Q&A right now, Mindy. Actually, one just came in. It seems like when I say that, someone pops one in there. Will Ray Marshall Center be conducting any external evaluation for our programs? Or do we need to budget to hire an external evaluator?
Now you're talking about evaluation of outcomes for an approved application and implementation of a program. Am I correct about that?
She says correct. Yes.
Okay. We are still in the formation stages of developing evaluation processes. We are following TWC and TWIC in this. They are our mentors in this. I would like to defer that question until we're a little farther down the road on this, but I do anticipate an external evaluation process.
Are there any other questions? Nothing's coming up in the Q&A, Mindy. It might be best to maybe direct folks to send their questions to our new email address if they come up after our webinar.
Let me reiterate our new email address. It is perkins.equity. And then the usual THECB extension, highered.texas.gov. That's perkins.equity.highered.texas.gov. This is not your only chance to ask questions. Please direct them to us at that address and we will respond. Stephanie, do we have another question?
We do. Jessica, to answer your question, does the new program webpage have a link to the March webinar registration? It does not. We will send that out to the field shortly in the next coming weeks before the webinar, as we usually do via our field communications. And those are all the questions for now, Mindy.
Okay, everyone, we will close this webinar then with our sincere thanks for your attendance, for your interest in this project. We encourage you to bring your best ideas, your most successful local equity programs, researched programs that you discover and would like to try to implement locally. We encourage you to bring the best you have and apply for this application. We want to evaluate your applications, looking at what is possible for the future in advancing equitable access to CTE and equitable opportunity for success in the state of Texas. We also want to begin building an evidence repository of our own about what works. The state will learn immensely from the projects you undertake. I thank our panelists today. I thank attendees. I invite questions as we move forward. And I wish you all a good day and a good week. Thank you again for attending.